Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday's Wonders, and so we look at some work of God's power in the Bible. But in fact, today we're not going to look at one particular work of God's power in the Bible. I want to be general. I want us to consider many of God's work, His power shown throughout the lives of those we read about in the Old and New Testament and also in our own lives. So I was thinking that as we read the Bible many, many times over, there are so many different acts of God's power that we see. We read of the incredible things that He has done. We read of miracles and things which are almost unbelievable. And they're unbelievable, yet we do believe them as Christians. We do believe them to be true. But I think for many of us, perhaps we are so familiar with them, they've perhaps lost a little bit of their awe and wonder. Perhaps they seem like things that happened a long time ago. And so even now for us as Christians, we think, well, if they're not unbelievable, then at best they are unlikely. We're not going to see that kind of thing today, we may believe. But what I want to do is I want to challenge us that whenever we read some amazing act of God's power in the Bible, and when we read of miracles especially, I want for you to stop and take a moment and ask God to help us, to help you in that moment. Because at these moments, we can remember some really key, some really important things about God. See, when we read of God sending a flood, or parting the Red Sea, or defeating armies, or healing people and raising the dead, when we read of His power at work in people's lives to change weak men into powerful, bold witnesses for the gospel, we should stop and marvel. We should offer God the praise that He is due for His mighty acts of power. It should remind us that there is nothing that is impossible for God. There's nothing that He cannot do. And that's true today for you. It should remind us that there's no one or no power more powerful than God. And that is true today. And it should remind us that this same powerful God is on our side. He's on your side. This is our God. This is your God. So when we read any act of God's power in the Bible, we need to stop. We need to ask God to help us, to reveal Himself to us, that we might remember these things. Nothing is impossible for Him. There's no one more powerful than Him. And this is your God. And I think there are certain times more than others, perhaps, when we need these reminders of God's power. You know, I was thinking of Adam and Eve. They had everything so good in this garden at first. Walking with God, at peace, naked, working, flourishing, enjoying all that God had given them. And then one foolish, deadly act changed everything. Their whole world fell apart. They felt guilt and shame and nakedness and separation from God. The whole world fell apart. And sometimes for some of us, it may feel that way as well. We might hit a wall, metaphorically. We have no more strength. Maybe fail again. We're disappointed again. Our hope seems just to have gone. Our situation seems impossible. We can see no way forward, humanly speaking, in whatever it is that we face. It might feel like our whole world has fallen apart, and yet, as with Adam and Eve, God offers a word of hope. He says to them in Genesis 3:15, there is hope. An offspring will crush the serpent's head. Everything is not bleak. Remember who I am, all-powerful God. I know what I'm doing. I am in control, and I am your God in your situation right now. So if we feel crushed, defeated, if we're struggling, if we're sad, if we're feeling hopeless, and when we read of these acts of God's power, let me encourage you again to pray and ask God to speak to you about them. Let him reveal himself to you in your situation. Remember that the all-powerful God is still all-powerful and that he's working for your good. So we should have hope. We should be encouraged. We should have peace. I would love for us to have these wonders of God, these acts of his power in history as remembrances. Let me explain that a little bit more. I wonder if you can remember when God spoke to the Israelites in Deuteronomy 6 verse 5. He gave them the command, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your might. He expected them to remember that in order that they would do it. He then goes on to tell them in Deuteronomy 7 verse 6, you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. Now that's an incredible promise. Can you imagine if they would just have remembered that every single day? Imagine if you would take that verse and make it personal to yourself, because as a Christian, this is true of you. God has chosen you to be his child. Imagine what a wonderful thing that is if you would remember that today. If you would take time to read Deuteronomy chapter 8, you would find that he speaks to them about remembering everything that he did in the past for the sake of Israel, that they might remember his commandments today and be obedient to them today. Remembering what God has done is so important. Remembering all of his mighty acts in history, as we see them in the Bible and also as we see them in our own lives, is so very important. That's why, again, we need to stop and consider carefully these acts of God's power as we read them, so that they might encourage us. After we read that verse in verse 5 of Deuteronomy chapter 6, after he's given them the greatest of all commandments, God says more to them. He says this, and these are the words that I command you today. They shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So here's a picture and a challenge for you. I think we need to almost do the same as this. Perhaps with the commands of God, but in particular with the promises of God. Write them out. Think of some of the mighty acts of God's power that you have read in the Bible and write them out. Think of some of the ways that you've seen God at work in your own life, maybe answers to prayer in your own life and in the life of others, and write them out. Write them out. Put them in a book so that you can read them over and over. Write them out and stick them on a wall. Maybe even write them out and stick them over the door frame into one of the rooms in your house. And then stand under that door frame and remember all the promises of God for you. Would that not encourage you as you remembered all these things that God has done, that he is capable of doing even still today? Would that not lift your heart? Would that not compel you to say, this is my God and I'm going to follow him today? Would it not give you great hope? Would it not lead you to praise and to worship? So go and do it. Go and find some of God's wonders, some of the acts of God's powers. Read them, dwell on them, write them out, and be encouraged and built up this day by them. Amen.